Welcome to the Business for Breakfast seminar series presented by Huddleston Bolin. Business for Breakfast seminars provide very practical information for business people on topics ranging from sales and marketing to customer service, employee relations, technology, and accounting. For information about upcoming seminars, go to www.huddlestonbolin.com/events.
First of all, I'd like to thank Thomas very much and Huddleston Bolin for having this. It's really great that they do this so periodically and give an opportunity for folks to get together and talk a little bit about different business topics. So thank you guys very much for having us this morning. And the topic of this morning is developing sales leaders. It's really about fundamentals of sales leadership. And the way this is put together is to be conversational. I have a bunch of questions. Really, we're looking for answers, and then I'll share some of my thoughts on it, so we'll see how that goes. But I wanted to start out really talking a little bit about what are the fundamentals of sales leadership. Take a quick look at leadership, 4 biggest jobs of a leader, 5 P's, and blending the two together. So that's what we're going to talk about, and it's about a half an hour or so. So we'll see how it goes. The first is what do you follow? What you're told, or what you see?
Well, everybody says what they see.
Yeah, I think that's generally what people say. You know, what's really interesting about sales leadership is that in reality it's got to be a solid part of both or more what you're told, because sales leaders really aren't salespeople. That's one of the big things we're going to talk about today, is that there's a big difference between being a great seller and being a sales leader. They're 2 different jobs entirely. And one of the things that sales leaders have a tough time with is that people think that they should be image builders, that the people who follow them should be saying, well, if Bob is a good seller, I'll follow him. If Bill is a good seller, if Sally is a good seller, she'll make a great sales leader. The truth is, that's not true. And the best thing to do with Sally, who's a great salesperson, is to leave her selling. It's best for the company. There's more reward for Sally. And most of the time, Sally won't be disappointed when she doesn't get promoted and fail at being a sales leader. We're going to take a look at why that happens. So what's the first step to being a general? You know, I really didn't think too much about it when I wrote that question, but I think today that's pretty pertinent. So what's the first thing you have to do to become a general?
Well, you have to. I think to go to the sales leadership level, you have to be able to think more strategically on long-term strategies, not the short-term tactical. A good salesperson is like a tactical leader. Mm-hmm. A good sales leader is like a strategic leader. The tactical leader is going to win the battle every day, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, going from place to place to place. They don't necessarily connect to the larger picture. A sales leader is like a general. You see the campaign. You know that there's going to be in the campaign that you're going to win and lose and win and lose. But what's most important is that at the end of the campaign, you won more than you lost.
Right.
There's a quote from Napoleon, Napoleon Bonaparte. After he was in exile, they said, how do you judge if you were successful or unsuccessful during a military campaign? He said, I look at how many mistakes I made.
Yeah.
And if I made 15 mistakes, but the Russian and Prussian generals made 27 mistakes, I won.
Right.
I made less mistakes. They made more mistakes. They failed. I was victorious. Because there's always going to be tons of mistakes. And I think to me, a good general understands that. It's not going to go the way you plan it. It's going to go, but if you set the system up, you're still going to come out victorious at the end.
Yeah, I think that's a good story, and it's interesting because to me the first thing that a general has to be is a good lieutenant, and you mentioned that. In order for you to really know how to lead lieutenants, you must understand what a lieutenant does. And as far as sales leadership is concerned, I would say the same thing happens. You don't have to be the best lieutenant to be a great general, but you have to understand what lieutenants do. You know, what is it you're going to ask them? How are you going to ask them to do it? And while they're out in the daily campaign, are they empowered enough to win the battle, to make, as you say, fewer mistakes? So if you're going to be a good general, you really have to understand what the lieutenants do. The people, and not necessarily what the rifleman does, but what the lieutenants do. You know, you can't know what the customer is doing every minute, but you have to know what your salespeople are expected to do almost every minute. So what do the best grader operators make the best civil engineers? You know, I always think about this when I'm watching people build roads. There's so much work going on and so many people standing around. So what are the people standing around doing compared to the grader operators? You talk about leadership. What's really going on there?
Well, they're orchestrating. I mean, think of it. Here's a military analogy. There's a military analogy to this too. When you're a soldier, like a rifleman, you've got your M16 and you've got your ammunition and you've got your bayonet. But if you're a lieutenant, they don't let you have an M16 anymore. You've got a sidearm. You've got a 45. You're supposed to use that only to protect yourself at the very end of your life. Your job is not to shoot the gun. Your job is to make sure that there's 12 other people shooting their guns all at the same time, or not, or stopping or pausing. So the first thing in military leadership that they do to the person that's going to go on is they take your weapon away from you, because you're not there shooting the weapon.
You're not rushing out to the front.
Right. These people are your weapon.
Yes.
So your point too about the civil engineer and operator, they're running it with the civil engineer standing back there with a map, guidebook, trying to understand and trying to see the big picture. Once again, the road's got to go from here to Charleston.
At a certain grade, at a certain pitch, in a certain distance, with a certain width. And that's what leaders are doing. You know, and I always get so disgusted looking around, particularly at state employees, when you see 3 of them watching and 4 of them working. Why can't the other 3? And it's time that we remember that those 3 have a job too. And that's kind of what leaders do. Sometimes leaders are required to watch, you know, to see if things are going on. So the final question is, should that civil engineer be a great grader operator? Should he ever or she ever operate the grader?
Right.
I should just understand what it takes to make the grader work and for the operator to operate it.
I agree, and here's the, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think understand it enough to maintain the respect of the grader operators.
Exactly.
They can't become too
You
disconnected.
can't become too disconnected, but the theory in sales leadership that relates to this is be cautious as a sales leader not to sell. Back to the first question. Let's say that you're not a good salesperson, excuse me, but you're a dynamic sales leader. It's like the civil engineer may be a really, really bad grader operator, but that doesn't mean that they're not really good at finishing that project. And that's the same with sales leadership. If your position is to lead, then you need to lead. If you sell, I know in large corporations that I've worked for, some companies contend that even the largest leaders, in terms of the organizational chart, still have to have some accountability for accounts. The worst thing in the world is to watch those accounts go downhill. While they're trying to lead, someone else is in there who's not responsible for leading, selling and selling and selling and stealing their business. So think about it from the point of construction, and that is somebody has to watch the project, and you can't expect the best watchers to be the best nailers or the best graders. The same with sales. So that's just something I would say to you as you look at leaders. They can't be detached, or they'll have no fellowship. Okay, so what are the 4 biggest tasks? This is what we say at ComAssist. The first one is building trust. Okay, building trust is the first major responsibility of a leader. And we talk about trust being 3 things: discernment, commitment, and follow-up. Discernment, commitment, and follow-up. The capability to be able to judge what's right and wrong. Okay? The instinct to know of those rights, which ones to commit to, and then the smarts to follow up on the ones that you commit to. So you think about how trust is built. It's really about being able to not be in a position of distrust. When you think about trust in general, it's so much easier to break it than it is to build it. So as a leader, a sales leader, you have to be in a position to create fellowship, and you do that by being ultimately trustworthy to those people you ask to follow. That's number 1. Then if you're a good builder of trust, you've got to create a brand. Okay? The truth of the matter is that whether it's in the magazine business, in the consulting coaching business, the legal business, whatever, people buy from people whose brands they trust. Right. They have the highest regard for the brand. In sales leadership, you're often in a position trying to decide whether people are going to buy from you, your company, or your sales rep. What you always want to do is to have people buying the brand. You don't want it to matter when Joe leaves or Sally leaves or Betty or Bill. And the way that you make that happen is that you market the brand. So as a sales leader, being responsible for how sales get done, you must market the brand in order to have turnover not affect you whatsoever. The second reason to market brand is it has the highest value. It has the highest value. When people talk about Tide, you know, I'm still amazed at what Tide can do after all those years, you know, because their brand is so strong. So think about creating brand as a leader. So the first thing to do is to build trust. The second is to create brand. Once you have good brand, then a sales leader or any leader needs to improve their margins. I mean, business is about profit. You know, we don't need to apologize for that. We need to seek it. Profit is, in reality, empowerment. Okay? So the fourth thing that we really need to be able to do is to look at how we empower choice. How do we empower choice? Okay? So the cycle that we coach at ComAssist is the four biggest leaders' tasks are to build trust, create brand, improve your margin, to empower choice. And those choices are becoming different, aren't they? Sustainability. What's happening in our world? How do we affect our planet? What's our environment? What are we doing for our community? Without profit, you don't have choice. And when you have profit, you have choice. So once you get to choice, you throw it back into making sure you make trustworthy decisions. Right? So it's a big, huge loop. So we would say that as we look at sales leadership, it's not just like any other kind of leadership. You have to be focused on these four things as a company. Does that make sense? Okay, so what do sales leaders deal with? First of all, there's a people component. We're going to take a look at that. What we're going to look at now is what sales leaders really deal with every day and how you take these leadership components and put them together to lead salespeople. So the first one is people. The second one is planning. Now, we've talked already about how much salespeople have to plan. They have to plan for profits. They have to plan for revenue. They have to plan for sales call. They have to plan for hiring. We'll just take a quick look at that. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to take these categories and write down some thoughts of your own of what you should be doing in these regards. Product. Too many times we think of salespeople having nothing to do with product, but a sales leader has got to empower sales success by having products in the hands of the individuals that are actually valuable. Okay? It's a critical value to send a sales representative out with something that has value to the client. I guarantee you they'll have a lot better chance of being successful, won't they? So product is ultimately important to the sales leader. So is productivity. That one kind of speaks for itself, doesn't it? Where are the numbers? How are they coming about? How are you going to put it to good use? And then finally, perseverance. Time and time and time and time and time and time again. It just keeps going on. And as it relates to coaching and counseling salespeople, that may be the ultimate. Right? Every industry has its own cycle for selling. We used to say in the chemical industry, 5 to 7 times before you can sell a single thing to a single soul. You know? So what is a cycle?
And for me, that's like when I made my transition, that was the biggest thing. When you're selling jewelry, your sales cycle is
Immediate.
30 to 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And in the jewelry business, you never have, in fact, this was a training thing we used to do. In a jewelry store, you come to visit with me, I have 35 seconds to 5 minutes to get you interested. I have to close you within 15 minutes, and then you either walk out of the store with the product or you walk out without, and you never come back. In fact, one of our sales training things we used to do to people is that salesperson would say, well, they said they'd be back in a few minutes. And so to break them of that mindset, you'd say, okay, fine, walk out in the mall and wait for them to come back. And then an hour goes by and they're just standing out there. And then you go back and you go out and get them and say, they're never coming back. They went on down to Zales or to Gordon's and they bought it there. Come back in the store now. And then the transition was like when I came to this business. I mean, now I still actually, I do something that most people don't do in this business is I close.
A lot of times
I
it closes
close
one visit,
one visit with
but
a
a lot
person.
of them aren't.
Right, a lot of them aren't. They have to come back a week later or 4 days later. And
Yeah, there's the
recycle.
emails back
Yeah.
and forth,
Here's
the
what-
conversation.
Here's what we coach about the sales close cycle management. Take something, leave something, prepare to come again. There are 3 things that need to happen in every communication, whether it be personal, a relationship you want to develop, or sales, and that is you've got to leave something of value with that individual. If you make a sales call and you take nothing away, that's wasted, even if it's information that you can use the next time. And then the ultimate to getting to a close is something that prepares you to come again. Okay, so for example, in the selling of jewelry in a retail establishment, that's a hook relative to enhancing that individual to come back. You know, are you interested enough to buy this at 15% off in the next half hour? You know, that kind of stuff. Something has to happen, and when you're coaching young salespeople, which is not, you know, is not out of the realm of responsibility for sales leaders, that's something that salespeople have to learn. You know, everybody, why is it that there's enough value for me to call you back?
One of the first things he taught me was the importance of taking the card. First of all, you automatic, and you leave your card. In our case, we also leave magazines and other information, but not just to take your card, but to learn from the Japanese, because what they do is they don't just take the card and let it disappear. If you do that when you meet somebody Japanese, you're never going to do business with them because they're insulted. You take the card and then you hold it in both hands as if it's something important or precious, and you take a few moments and read it, or at least pretend you are.
Right.
And before you, and then you nod, you know, and then you like make an acknowledgement between the two of you, and then you take it aside. And so there's always like a back and forth that way.
Perseverance is absolutely important. You can't manage sales cycles, you can't lead a sales team unless you have a great deal of perseverance. So here's what we say. We say we believe in matrix management, and even though sales leadership is very strategic, it can be very tactical, okay? And the way that you make it tactical is you take the key components and you place them in a matrix, and then you ask your sales leaders to dwell on these things, okay? So what we're saying here is we call this the Magnificent 20, and we apply it to a lot of things besides sales leadership, okay? Think about those 5 characteristics or assets in a business, things you must do, and then you think about what you're accountable to do as a leader, and you say, okay, what are my activities? Whether they be strategic or tactical in that 20-block area there, okay? And so that's a great way to develop a leadership or an expectation of your leaders. Not only that, it's a great way to develop something for yourself so you can judge yourself. Are you leading other people? Do I have categories of work in this? And this is things I'm going to ask you to do. If you look at people, for example, what are your trust factors? What are your brand factors? You know, what are your margin factors? What are your choice factors? So just write down or mentally think of a couple things. I'll show you some things I think in a minute. But think about what are the trust factors related to people that a leader should be doing.
Well, communication is extremely important for trust building.
Communications, absolutely.
I mean, it's a broad-based communication. Like with West Virginia Executive Magazine, we have a system that I think does the trust factor, builds the technology, builds on all of these things. If I come and see you and I sell you something, you're not going to talk to me next. You're going to talk to Jennifer at the office because she's going to contact you about your ad and about what you want to put in it. Maybe Lisa, the graphic arts. So what happens is now, we think what happens is that it starts to build a feeling that there's a whole group of people behind the tip of the spear. I'm the tip of the spear. There's a whole group of people back there, graphic artists, editors, writers, and they're now going to communicate with you. And not me. I do it on purpose. You're not going to communicate with me for a while now, because I want you to know that there's just not just me that came and sold you something. There's a whole team of people.
But then when the magazine comes out, you make sure
And
that
I
they make
recycle
contact
back to them.
and make sure that they're happy, make sure they receive the magazine, what did you think?
Right.
So that it builds, and then there's also just the visiting with people and
Exactly.
building the trust. Here's what we have in common as human beings.
So, I think what you described actually is not only trust, but it's also brand building. I don't know how you develop those two. It's almost hard to break them apart, isn't it, when you're doing them?
Trust and brand, because then what happens is that the next time you want to buy something, you've met a team. You've bought the brand of Executive Magazine. There's a whole team of people that are connecting to you. So I've had people actually. This has happened for me. Because I'm the only salesperson. Ami and I are the only salespeople for the magazine right now. So
On and off, there are others.
but they all come and go as soon as I want to learn this because I can't keep people. We're a very, very thin group when it comes to sales and marketing for Executive Magazine. There's just myself and Ami, and then Kinsey, my other partner, our other partner. She's an editor, but she has to sell too. Not because she wants to, but because we just don't have the bodies in the field. Yeah, I try to teach everybody something. But anyway, I'm sorry, but the trust and brand does connect together.
Yes, they do. Very close.
You've got to trust.
Right.
Yeah.
And that trust, in that essence, is the ultimate development of brand. But brand also then has to go further than just the trust, and that is, what does it deliver? I mean, there's a value proposition that starts to, if you look at what we write, we put words between them. Brand builds margin, for example, and that's what happens. The more trust you have in the brand, then you can increase the value. The asking price goes up, the value to the client gets bigger and bigger, and that's why they keep coming back. So what do you do with brand specifically? I mean, think about how do you take it a step further with brand?
What I think happens is that actually it's part of their individual branding. The magazine has reached a certain level of status.
Yes.
And so now that status reflects back. Only the best are in the magazine, and the ads, because we use heavy paper, we use full color, it's very glossy, it makes everyone look beautiful, and we use our own graphic artists for people
Who can't produce something.
right.
So-
They don't have an advertising agency. In other words, we won't let a substandard ad play in the magazine.
So I hear you talking about quality. All right, quality, and that quality relates to the people as well as to the product, doesn't it?
That makes
And it brings them to other
It's
people.
easier to sell advertising in Western Executive now than it was in 98, 99 when nobody ever heard of it.
Yeah.
Now when I call people and say, "Hi, Mark from Western Executive," they say to me, "Oh, I'm glad you're talking to me, and you're talking because you want to talk about the magazine." And I say, "I'll be in Beckley Wednesday. Can I come and see you?" Or Huntington on Thursday. Can I come and see you? They're like, "Yes."
Yeah.
When I first started the magazine, honestly, this is where it had nothing. It had no trust, it had no brand. I first started the magazine, I'd call somebody and say,
But
"I'm
it was
Mark
your
with Western
personal
Executive."
brand and your personal
Right.
trust.
It was a lot of times it was my personality making the bridge.
Right.
But sometimes too, people just would hang up on me.
Sure.
Like people laugh and hang up because they thought I was just being some kind of silly joke. Western Executive magazine play. So it's all pop. So it is those trust hire and brand. Yeah.
But I
Well,
will
here's
say
some- I'm
that
sorry, go ahead,
personal
Ellen.
trust factors also count.
Yeah.
Because I will say that you had already been branded. A lot of people in the community knew you already. And in fact, the owner of the magazine used your branding for himself and for the other salespeople.
And he's a good leader when he does that, isn't he? I think that's part of the points that I would make today, is that the best leaders pick the best people for the jobs. Okay? And the final analysis, if you look at the people here are things that we look at trust factors: hiring, placement, and evaluation. That's the biggest trust. The truth of the matter is, when it comes to people, the ultimate trust is hiring the right person. And in sales leaders need to be aware of evaluation programs and assessments. Now, I will be candid with you. I like the old-fashioned way of hiring, sitting across the table, interviewing people, calling their friends, doing those kind of things. But there's a huge investment that a lot of people are making now in assessments. Here's what's successful in my world in advertising sales. Here's what the characteristics of a good advertising salesperson are. You can find those characteristically by the character of the individual, the personality of the individual. So think about that. But the first trust factor really in people is hiring and placement and evaluation. And then the evaluation part, I just want to mention, that's transparency, it's consistency, it's doing the same for every person. Day after day after day. Jane gets judged the same way that Bill does. okay, period.
Right.
Never different. But it's easy to say, of course, but believe you me, it's harder to do it, okay? Because you like Bill and you want Bill to succeed, and Jane's out there knocking down doors and getting orders, but Bill's working his tail off and his results aren't good, and you know, the coach in you wants you to reach out and save Bill.
Right.
That's not a leader's job, not in sales, okay? Not in sales. Empowering success. This is the coaching part we talked about before, but you notice I say they're not selling. Again, not the selling part. It's not your responsibility to go save Bill by getting the order for him.
And that's a mistake I've made so many
That's why I'm
times.
Okay.
confusing
Because-
salespeople.
Right.
Because like okay, I mean it's weird because I'm a really strong salesperson and I keep hiring people, and then I make like this is a mistake I'm making.
Right.
And then I go try to save them.
Exactly.
And I go to Morgantown, go to 4 appointments, and I close all 4 appointments, get 4 contracts, and I give them to Bill.
Yeah. See, Mark, my question to you is why would you pay Mark for work you're doing? I mean, to be very candidly. So you know, really not selling, creating opportunity. Now, we contend that it is part of the sales leader's job to make sure there's a strong marketing campaign in front of and behind the sales rep. All right? Big difference in marketing and selling. And if you're confusing the two, that can be detrimental to your sales team. Okay? You might even empower Bob or Sally by having a great relationship, and you say, hey, Jim, how about seeing Sally for me? Good, leave it at that. If Sally succeeds, that's fine. If Sally doesn't, come back and coach her, but don't go with her and get the order for her. That's what we're saying here. Then trust factors, brand factors, customer-facing excellence, how teams look and what are their standards. I loved our conversation before we started formally here today, and we were talking about what you had to do in the jewelry business. Very, very important. I still struggle every day when I'm going somewhere. Do I have on this tie or don't I have on this tie? I come in this morning with a checkered shirt, which I brought with me. I got up this morning and decided not to wear the checkered shirt. It depends on your audience, but one thing I would say there about brand factors is Dow used to do this in the chemical industry. Blue jackets, dark ties, white shirts. You could see them all over the Northeast. That's a Dow rep, that's a Dow rep, that's a Dow rep.
IBM was the same way back
Yeah.
in the 70s.
And it works. You know, it works for whom? Not the client, the company. It's a standard that they expect. And so when it comes to brand factoring, that's something you have to look at. Helping and consulting, creating buying opportunities. You can read this yourself, but the margin factors are important here too. What are you going to pay your sales reps? See, none of these things are about selling, are they? They're about leading other sales reps, okay? Initiatives and programs. Do you have a periodic bonus program? Do you have something? If you give me orders in my down months, do you make more than when it's my up months? Filled in stream, okay? If you can sell filled in stream in the middle of the summer, you ought to get more than if you sell it in the fall, okay? You see what I'm saying? These are leadership opportunities for salespeople and choice factors. These are the things that might be the hardest, although they start back to the trust. What have you done with the time and territory management? You know, did you tell Sally, Sally, you must make 13 sales calls a week to work here? And then did you count them? And did you talk to her about it? And if you didn't, who's the failure? Not Sally. And I'll guarantee you, if you're paying Sally a salary, you tell her 13, she makes 11 and you accept it, she'll never make 13. Right? It just won't happen. It's human nature. So leaders have to manage choice. And the big thing there is alignment and clients. People have to be asked to sell who they can sell. Everybody cannot sell everybody. Now, coming from the chemical industry, we used to have some of the best golfers in the world. They were terrible sellers. They had great numbers in the 80s and the early 90s. By the mid-90s, they were going broke. You get my drift? I mean, you've got to put the right client. If you have somebody that's laid back, do not send them a type A. It won't work. Get out of my office, you know? So that's some things to think about. These are just some things we like to coach people on to think about when we talk about the accountability of people. So what about planning? Same thing goes here. You have to think about what are your trust factors and your brand factors. And just think about the ease of the matrix management of leadership here. You don't need 4 in every category. But what if you're managing yourself by having one in each one? There are 20 things you're paying attention to in this coming year. As a sales leader, here are the 20 things I'm going to do to increase sales. Selling is not on the list. In your case, you might want to divide them. I'm going to sell 3 days a week. I'm going to be a sales leader 2 days a week. And on those Mondays and Wednesdays, when it's leadership time, you don't do any selling. Okay? You see what I'm saying? Because you've got to divide the two. So we'll just take a quick look here at some of the things that we think might be under these categories. And you can notice I like to ring the cash register when the margin factor. Why not? That's where the money is. Trust factors as it comes to planning. A system that works. It has shared accountability, and there's no haste and there's no waste. Very important. No haste, no waste. One of the things that I find about sales planning is everybody wants to get it done. Let's throw out a number. Let's promise it to our boss. In your all's case, let's promise it to our partners. You know, one of the things that you want to make sure of is that you deliver what you promise. As a sales leader, the best way not to stay one is to not deliver what you promise. Okay? If you overpromise because you think it's necessary, that's haste. That makes waste. Spend the time to do it. Think about who are the clients, where are they coming from, the old or the new. Are we converting, are we penetrating, what are we doing? Have a plan. Have a solid plan that you work with that takes time to sit down and do. Okay? Because you think about what you're doing here in relationship to this trust brand margins, you're creating margin. Okay? You're creating margin. You're empowering the choice of the company. Culturally aware planning. Plan the brand story. Okay? Remember I talked about the marketing need of a sales leader? Sales leader is the one that transitions the marketing plan to the storytelling in the field. Okay? So plan the story. Right down to what are you going to have as your value proposition for your order getting. Convert the power of the marketing plan to getting to yes. Does that make sense?
It does. This is very nice, yeah. Because everything you're saying connects back to what I live through every day.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I've got the responsibility to keep the executive magazine alive.
Right.
We're totally, look at my product. My product only has 2 ways to make money: subscriptions or advertising sales. And we have like 250, 300 subscriptions at $28 a year.
Yeah.
So that money is gone. So everything else is driven by the advertising sales. And in my mind, I know how much money, because of being a group of partners and because of management, I know how much money it costs to make an executive magazine every quarter. And also at the beginning of each quarter, we're back to zero again.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have no money. We have money.
We have money, but we look at it as each
quarter
issue
has to stand on it.
Yeah, so zero-based budgeting each quarter.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it leads to a more profitable year end.
Right. And so to have what you're saying, to have a plan that is long term, that is not hastily put together is very important. And this is good stuff. I appreciate this.
Well, you know what's really interesting?
It's convincing people not to say they can do X amount just to make you happy or just to make someone else happy.
Right.
Right.
But to actually say realistically, whether or not the person listening is going to want to hear it or not, it needs to be realistic
Right.
numbers, and that way people
Right.
can meet their goals,
Right.
and it will.
I mean, to be successful in magazines, advertising sales, it's a pretty straightforward formula, but I can't get people to do it.
Yeah.
The formula really is you make a whole bunch of phone calls per week. It could be between 60 to 75 phone calls. Depends upon the person.
Uh-huh.
I can make 15 to 20 phone calls, and I can get 12 or 13 appointments because I've done it for a long time.
Right.
It's hard for me to translate to some other person who's never done it. What they need to do is it's a system. You make phone calls, you get appointments. You should be able to close. Maybe this is why I'm making a mistake with my people. I close, let's say, in 1 week, I'll close about 3 sales a week, you think?
Actually, we close 3 to 5
Sales a week.
sometimes 6.
Right. And a majority of those people met me that day
Right.
because I've got a real strong closing technique.
Or they've already
Okay.
met you
Or they've met
over
me
the
once
years.
before, they know something, right.
But some of these do take 2 and 3 weeks. A lot of them
Right.
go through committees, they have to be voted on.
Right.
So it's not like it's all a one-shot thing.
Yeah.
It's,
But when I get new salespeople, like I had this wonderful young man who just was starting up in Morgantown, and I said to him, I said, how many phone calls have you made?
but
And he-
here's maybe we've been afraid
Let's-
of people having a
Yeah,
script.
yeah.
Maybe you should have the story of the magazine the way you tell it as a script for others.
Yeah, I tell you, we do a lot of coaching in that regard, and I'd be glad to talk to you about that. I think the thing that could really help you is warming up those calls, and we'll talk about a little bit how to do that. So we got these brand factors and then these margin factors. And what I wanted just to mention on this slide really is the plan needs to include these things: revenue, margin, pocket price. Not price, but pocket price. What's left after all the reductions for discounts and payment terms and all that other stuff? Do you really know what you're getting per order? And service, what are you going to give them for them? And it's got to be based on things like who's old, who's new, how many old, the whole thing. That's a good plan. And then you go out and you manage that plan. So, and you can have a copy of this if you'd like. All right, so if you look at productivity, here's just some thoughts that we have on productivity too. And once again, I like to ring this cash register, okay? Trust factors, discerning commitments and delivering commitments. We talked about that under trust. When you think about what's happening here with product, is your value coming back to the customer? Do they see it? Do they get more orders because they're in your magazine? Do they get better sales because I coach them in sales? You know, that's the ultimate thing. If you're not making discerning commitments, if you're not selling something that you know is going to have a value to that client, you might want to back away from that because eventually that will run your brand. And that's what sales leaders have to manage. Okay, look at margins down here, next value. I think the thing that sales leaders need to do, that they don't do, is to worry about next. What's my next product? What's my next price? What's the next value? How do we improve this thing? Remember I talked about taking something, leaving something, preparing to come again? The best way to do that is to focus on next. You know, what's next? What are we going to do next? Not some big, huge step, but some innovation. Okay, not invention, but innovation. Innovation is what's really selling now, not invention. So think about what's next. Decreasing cost and increasing margins. You know, that's what you're all about. And then the choice factor is important here in product. And that is make sure your fit, form, and function is there. As a leader, it's up to you to make sure that you're sending your sales reps to the places where your fit, form, and function works.
Right.
Okay.
And that's where, when I'm with people, I don't use how I sell or the kind of people I go visit as an example, because there's a certain group of clients that should be in the magazine.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not necessarily people I'm selling to.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to create a list or help the first salesperson get a list that's more logical to be in the magazine. Because I do a lot for them,
Right.
for the magazine, because I'm doing things that are totally illogical for the magazine and succeeding.
Mm-hmm.
That's a hard thing for me because
It's not that it's illogical, it's that you think outside the box and help other people see that, see the new framework with you.
yeah.
So that's different.
Well, I think it's a good segue into productivity. When you think about how do you have a productive sales team, I mean, here's some things that you can think about. You know, first of all, unfailing honesty, fairness, and timeliness. That's absolutely true. So if you're dividing your sales between what you're doing and what your younger salespeople are doing, where are they going, who are they trying to convert, it's really very, very important that they are going somewhere that they can win.
Yeah.
And I
Okay.
think that we have not been as particular in figuring out with them, maybe sitting with them
No,
where
we
they think
haven't.
they can go.
Yeah.
Where
So
they
think
can
about
win.
that.
Where they can win. That's I'm going to write that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
important.
Send sales reps where they can win, and then also
You
think
just
that
assume they can win everywhere, but they can't.
they can't.
Right. Because I believe I can win everywhere. That's one of my failings. I believe I can win in any circumstances.
So then look at brand factors. You have to have a process. That's something that deals with your volume and your margin and whether it's new or old. And once again, evaluate that results in terms of revenue, margin, price. And then the choice factors, there's got to be new goals. And if you're working with somebody that you want to save and you're convinced you should save them, make sure that their goals are reasonable. They will do better if you lead against results that are achievable than results that are not. So just keep that in mind. So what do we look at in perseverance? Once again, here's just some things that we look at, and you should have your own. I'll show you in a minute what the result of this is. Trust factors. In perseverance is leading the sales cycle. You remember we talked about that 5 to 7 times, 1 to 3 times, managing turn. Brand factors. This is very important as a sales leader. Do not let your brand get destroyed by the drive to have more orders. Do not downsize your expectation for upsizing the revenue. Okay? That's all I would say there. Very important. Margin factors. Are they getting better and are they sustainable? Big key indicator for a sales leader. If your margins are disappearing, sit down and redo the plan. Go talk to the team. I need lower cost. I'm getting the best price I can. Or be strict with yourself and say that most of the time you find out you've softened up on price. You've downsized your value. Okay, so that's perseverance. Here's what you get when you're finished. And this is what you can manage sales leadership by. Okay? And what I'm saying is you don't need all these bullet points that I've made to manage yourself in a matrix form. But 20 things. Here are the 5 things I'm doing in people. And think about this. I'm not suggesting that everybody leading sales needs to have a matrix. But I'm suggesting that everybody who leads sales ought to have a matrix. You know, not my matrix, but your matrix. Something that you go by, something that makes you understand that it's a profession, okay, with rules and guidelines and expectations, okay? That's my message today. All right, so summing it up, it's about leadership, not about advanced selling. Big key, okay? That's a challenge in your all's company, I understand that. I would say solve it. Some way, some shape, some form. It's about the 4 major business concerns: trust, brand, margin, choice. Every sales leader should be charged with that. Build more trust, improve my brand, get more margin, empower more choice. You'll be a great sales leader if you can do that. It's about the 5 Ps: people, planning, product, productivity, and perseverance. Every business has that. You can't get away from it. Okay? And finally, do not judge a potential sales leader by their selling success. Reread number 1 above. Okay? It really is. It really is. Okay, so we've talked about these things. We won't go through them again. But the final thought is, do not judge potential sales leaders by their selling success. I'll say it over and over and over again because it's imperative. Keep your best sellers as sellers and reward them handsomely. You know, I'll tell you a quick story. Back in, I would say, early 90s, we were sitting at a restaurant in Atlantic City with some clients of ours, and the vice president of sales was sitting by the president and owner of this chemical distribution company. And we've had an opportunity to speak for a while, and all of a sudden he says, you know, my vice president of sales makes more money than I do, and it really upsets me. Our vice president was there, and he said, I wish my general managers made more money than I do. I'd be very happy. The point is, why wouldn't the salespeople make the most money? Because they empower the whole organization. Good leaders get to that. All right, so don't take your best salespeople out of the field, make them sales leaders, when in fact their most progressive contribution is the money they bring in. And you and they will probably be glad that you never made good salespeople good sales leaders. That's it. Thanks a lot.
For information about upcoming seminars, go to www.huddlestonbolin.com/events.